everyone, I'm Miranda and welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm so excited to say that I am off on a holiday to London very soon, and I thought it would be fun to have a chat with you about the books I've been looking at to inspire my trip to London, as well as the books I've been reading specifically in preparation for this trip, and of course the books that I'm going to be bringing in my suitcase as well. Of course, I lived in London for 15 years, so I'm very familiar with the city, but I'm still so excited to be going back. My mum's going to be coming with me, and we're staying very near to Chelsea, so I'm really looking forward to walking along the river and exploring Chelsea Village properly. We've also booked a lot of exhibitions, which I'll tell you a bit more about later, but briefly we've booked things like the Beatrix Potter exhibition at the V&A and the Secret Garden exhibition at the Garden Museum, and we've booked to see Dickens House and the Carlyle House. Basically a lot of literary inspired exhibitions and destinations for this trip, and of course I'm looking forward to book shopping too. But anyway, let's get started on the books that have been inspiring me. So before I go somewhere, I always love to do a bit of research and get myself in the mood, and part of how I've been getting in the mood for my trip to London is to look at some beautiful guidebooks. So this is a favourite of mine, Pretty City London, Discovering London's Beautiful Places by Siobhan Ferguson. Siobhan has the Pretty City London account, which is a beautiful account on Instagram that celebrates the prettiest spots in London. And I met Siobhan a few times when I lived in the city. I remember going to some of her book launches, including the one for this, which was so much fun. And I've just been really enjoying flicking through the book again. She really highlights a lot of the sort of London neighbourhoods or villages, so places like Hampstead and Chelsea. And I love all of the beautiful photographs in the book. It's just really putting me in the mood to flick through and look at these gorgeous places. This makes me so excited to go back to Hampstead. I can't wait to be walking around Hampstead again. And of course, Chelsea. There's John Sandoe Books in Chelsea, which is my favourite bookshop. And yes, I'm just getting really excited looking through here at the beautiful photos, remembering some of my favourite places, and getting very excited about seeing them again. Another similar book is London in Bloom by Georgiana Lane. I've had the pleasure of meeting Georgiana Lane as well, and I remember when this gorgeous book came out, and it really is another beautiful volume. If you want to get inspired by some of London's prettiest destinations and where to go for gorgeous floral photography, then this is definitely a book for you. Chelsea has some really lovely shops that often have a lot of floral decorations, so I'm really excited to walk around Chelsea again and Belgravia. Maybe I'll get to Peggy Portion Cafe, which is the cafe on the cover of the book. I really hope I'll be able to take advantage of our time there and get to lots of places. But both of these books are great if you want really just some of the highlights of a visit to London and a bit of an idea for some of the most attractive little neighbourhoods to head to. And if you're a photographer as well and you're keen to get some beautiful snapshots of the city while you're there, then these two books are really inspiring and would be very useful to you. Now, for fellow bookworms, I of course was having fun having a look at this book, Bookshop Tours of Britain by Louise Boland, and there is a chapter on London in here. This book is really about bookshops all over the UK, so there's not that much specific to London, but there is a chapter. and I was having fun looking through it. I know all of the bookshops that are mentioned in here, but I was reminded of a few that I should try to get to this time, especially the London Review Bookshop. I didn't make it there on my last trip to London, so I'd really like to head back there this time, I hope. There's a really nice cafe in this bookshop too, which is always a plus for me. So looking at this chapter has reminded me that I really need to try and get that bookshop on my list. Then I want to go to some bookshops in Notting Hill, and I might also pop into South Kensington Books and Belgravia Books, as I'll be in that area as well. So I really can't wait to do some great book shopping while I'm in London, and this book is getting me excited for that too. Now, like I said, we're going to be staying pretty near Chelsea. I'm really looking forward to having walks along the river and exploring Chelsea itself quite a bit. And I've compiled some books that have been inspiring me specifically with Chelsea in mind, and some of the books I've been reading recently, others I might bring with me on the trip. But I mentioned that I booked to see the Carlyle House, which is a National Trust property, and it's located on Cheney Row in Chelsea. I, funnily enough, never went when I lived in London. I was in London for 15 years and I kept meaning to visit the Carlyle House, but you know how it is when you live somewhere, you so often don't actually make it to the place. And then because I moved out of London during the first real lockdown, we didn't get the chance to sort of like say proper goodbyes or do any last minute things that I'd never had a chance to do while I was in London, but always intended to. So that was hard in a way, but I'm really thankful that now I'm getting to go back and I'm getting to go to some of those places that I really would have wanted to see before leaving London. One of those places was definitely the Carlyle House. So this was the home of Thomas and Jane Carlyle, and I've been reading The Carlyles at Home by Stay at Home in preparation to seeing the house. This is such a brilliant Persephone book. I really recommend it. It's just a fascinating account of how the Carlyles lived in Chelsea in the 1800s. It's really a biography of their home as much as it is the Carlyles. The book really only covers the time period in which they actually lived in Chelsea. So it's not an official biography in a way of the Carlyles in terms of their life, and it doesn't go into details particularly about their marriage or anything like that. What it really examines is their domestic lives. And because of that, there's an especial focus on Jane Carlyle rather than her famous literary husband. And I really enjoyed that. I've always found Jane Carlyle to be quite a fascinating character, and I really enjoyed getting to know a bit more about her and her role in Carlyle's life, but also who she was as an individual woman as well. And I loved the strong domestic focus to this book. There's actually 2 whole chapters devoted just to the cooks and maidservants that worked for Jane Carlyle. She went through, I think, something like 34 in 32 years or something, just one after another. And she was rather a demanding mistress, and Carlyle himself was very particular about what he would eat and how much noise was allowed and things like that. And Jane Carlyle had to train her staff to cook things the way he wanted them to cook, the way he wanted them to be cooked, and all of his sort of particulars. And she was very house proud herself, so she had high standards. So that was partly one of the reasons why she went through so much staff, but she also had quite bad luck with some of them in many ways too. And there's tales of like terrible drunkenness, for instance. But what really comes over was that Jane Carlyle, I think, was actually quite a kind person as well, and she did try and actually got very fond of a few of her maidservants, for instance, and to one of them in particular, she almost had quite a motherly instinct towards her. So this was such an interesting read, and honestly, if you're planning a trip to London, Chelsea is a great area to visit, and I would definitely recommend booking to see the Carlyle House and read this book before you go. I'm really pleased that I've read it. Now I'm really excited to see the house, and I hope I'll get to walk in the garden too. Apparently Carlyle loved walking in the garden, and he would always smoke his pipe while he was out there, and he would stick his old pipes of his all into the cracks in the walls of the garden. So when he went out, he'd already have like these pipes stuck into little crevices, already stuffed with tobacco that were like all ready for him. So I just can't wait to see sort of little details like that. And after Carlyle's death, I think the house was instantly then turned into a museum. So it's quite extraordinary in that it really has remained very much the same as to when they were both living there, and they carried out quite a few changes to the house, mainly because of Carlyle's obsession with wanting a soundproof room that he never really achieved. But I'm so curious to see the sort of the area of Cheyne Row and Cheyne Walk in particular, because many famous residents lived along those streets. Dante Gabriele Rossetti, I think, also lived at one point in Cheyne Row. Apparently he kept peacocks. I don't think at the same time as the Carlyles were there, but I'm curious because that would have definitely driven Carlyle mad. So that's hilarious. And there have been other very famous sort of literary people living in the area, and also who were guests to the Carlyles. So Dickens was a guest, Elizabeth Gaskell lived in the area as well. It's just going to be a wonderful literary destination, and I can't wait. So I'm so glad that I read this book in preparation. And then also thinking about other books set in Chelsea, I read about this series for children, which is called the 6 Chelsea Walk series. And this is a series that's a collaboration between 3 different female writers. So Anne Turnbull, Adele Jarras and Linda Newbury. They each wrote 2 books, making up a series of 6 books in total. And the premise is that all of these stories take place in the same big house in Chelsea. And you see this house going through time, the changes that take place to the house, to the environment, and also the different people who live in the house through the years. So it starts with Girls with a Voice, which is set in 1764. And I think this is about a young girl who goes to the house, which at this point in time is a boarding school for young ladies. And she really wants to be a musician. Then the next is set in 1857, when the house, I believe, is now a family home, and it's called Girls with Courage. And this is about a young girl who especially is passionate about gardening. Then Girls Behind the Cameras, set in 1895, again in the same house, and this is about very early photography. Then the next one, Girls for the Vote, is in 1940. This is of course about the suffragettes. Then you see the house and Chelsea generally in the time of the Second World War. And so we have Girls at War, which looks really good. And then the final one in the series is set in 1969, Girls on the Up. So I just started reading the first in the series, and I'm really enjoying it. I think would be a great series for young people, obviously, getting to know a bit of the history of an area. And I love the idea of taking the same house and examining it through the ages and through the lives of different young women growing up in the house. So I think that's just a great premise for a series, and I'm really enjoying them, even reading them as an adult right now. Then another wonderful Chelsea read I have to recommend, and I've been having a look at this one again in preparation for my trip. That's A Chelsea Concerto by Frances Faviel. I read this book for the first time last year, and it's one of the most incredible memoirs about London during the Blitz that I've ever read. Chelsea was very heavily bombed during the Second World War, and Frances Faviel's recollection of that time is just extraordinary. She was an artist living in a little Chelsea studio at the start of the war, and she became a volunteer for the Red Cross. She witnessed many horrific incidents during the war, but she kept such an amazing warmth to her, and she had a tremendous urge to always help other people. And the way she described the community of Chelsea really coming together during the Second World War was very humbling and very inspiring. I absolutely loved this book, and it's one I really recommend if you end up visiting Chelsea yourself at some point. And I've been enjoying dipping into it again. And then when I mentioned on Instagram that I'd read and really enjoyed the Carlyle's at Home, someone put a comment on saying it reminded them of the opening of A Traveller in Time by Alison Utley. I have this beautiful folio edition of the book here. And I was so glad they reminded me of the opening, because although the action of the book very quickly moves to a farm in the countryside, it does actually start in a house on Cheney Row. And it's mentioned that a lot of people walk by the house on their way to the Carlyle House. And it's just a really lovely detail in the book. And I read the opening chapter because I wanted to remember this scene, and especially as I'll be in the area myself. And Alison Utley really evokes Cheney Row so well, in this lovely old house in London. And it got me intrigued about if she'd ever really spent time there. And I looked it up, and in fact she did live in Cheney Row herself in 1909. She was teaching physics at a school in Fulham at that point, and she lived in Chelsea. And I thought that was just a really lovely little connection, and again another literary person who lived on that street, which is quite remarkable. So I was just really thrilled to know that detail, and I thought a lot of you would probably appreciate that as well, as I know a lot of you are Alison Utley fans too. Anyway, I really liked reading just the opening chapter again in preparation for my trip, and it's just made me excited for London. Another book I had to just also quickly reference is The Pursuit of Love, because in this book Linda lives in a flat. I can't remember if it's Cheney Row or Cheney Walk, but it's one of them. Very similar, and she lives there sort of just before and during World War II. So I thought that was another fun literary reference to that particular part of Chelsea. And then a couple other books I've been looking at in preparation for my trip is this one, Mudlarking by Laura Makelem, Lost and Found on the River Thames. This is a great book all about mudlarking, which is the practice of walking along the River Thames and sort of scouring the muddy banks of the river for lost treasures. And there are some rules to mudlarking, and Laura Makelem talks about that, but she also talks about some of the history of the Thames and the history of mudlarking. And I love walking along the Thames myself. I've never tried to do any mudlarking. At one point I thought maybe it'd be fun to try, but in all honesty, fascinating as I found this book, I also found some of it quite horrific in terms of what you can find. So Lara Makelem, I think, you know, she talks about finding human remains and things like that. I'm far too squeamish. I'd freak out even over, you know, needles or something. I don't think I'd enjoy it, in all honesty. So I'm going to save mudlarking for like braver souls. But I still find this whole aspect of the River Thames really fascinating, and the history behind it. And this was still a really interesting book to read. I really enjoyed going to a talk that Lara gave about the subject as well a few years ago. And I also am hoping to get to Richmond and sort of just more of southwest London, Hammersmith I'd like to get back to. And I love the walks along the Thames that you can do there. So this is a great book if you want to go to London and really kind of enjoy some walks along the Thames, and this would be a great book to inspire you as well. And then Lara Makelem wrote the introduction to the Manderley Press edition of another lovely London story, which is The Armourer's House by Rosemary Sutcliffe. So I've been having a look at this book again too before heading to London. I loved this story. It's a children's book, but honestly it's so well written and it's so well researched too. It's about London in Tudor England times, and it's amazing how Rosemary Sutcliffe can just bring a period of time in the past back to life, and I think many adults would enjoy this story too. There's a lovely description of the younger children going to sort of Chelsea Meadows and picking the flowers there, and it's just amazing to think of that when you consider what Chelsea looks like nowadays. So I've been enjoying dipping into this one again, and the lovely Rebecca, who's the founder of Manderley Press, which published this book, has invited me to tea. So I'm also really looking forward to hearing a bit more about Manderley Press from her and sort of seeing where it all started. So that will be a lovely aspect to my trip as well, I'm sure. So that's really lovely. And then I thought I'd just share some of the books that I'll be bringing in my suitcase too. I'm not going to bring, or I'm trying not to bring, too many books with me because of course I'm planning to do book shopping whilst I'm in London, and I'm trying to keep my packing as light as possible so I'm not just ridiculously burdened, and I know I'll be bringing books back with me. So I'm trying to be sensible and not bring too much with me. However, I do think that I will bring a copy of The Secret Garden to read. I'm really looking forward to going to the Secret Garden exhibition at the Garden Museum. They're showcasing lots of different editions of the book, and I think different artworks from the different editions, which will be fascinating. Although, I mean, I started having a look at all of the different editions I have of The Secret Garden and thought I could pretty much set up a little museum room myself. It's a little ridiculous how many editions I have. So I wonder if I'll see a lot of familiar faces, so to speak, familiar book jackets in this exhibition. But anyway, I think I'd like to bring the book with me to sort of dip in and out of it a bit before going to the exhibition. And then I was so thrilled to be sent this new British Library crime classic book, Death of Jezebel by Christiana Brand. I was really thrilled to get this from the publisher. I'd really enjoyed Green for Danger by Christiana Brand, which I read a few weeks ago, and I thought that was brilliant, and I was really looking forward to reading more by her. This book has apparently been almost impossible to find secondhand, so it's so great that they've brought it out again, and I'm really looking forward to reading it. It sounds like it's a bit of a classic sort of locked room mystery, only it's very much set within a theatre, And I think that the death or the murder occurs in this sort of stage tower, and it sort of happens while a play is going on. It sounds really, really good anyway. I can't wait to read this, and I think this will just be quite a nice, fun book. They'll be great to read on the train and things like that. So looking forward to this one. And then, because I'm also bringing a little bit of work with me to London in terms of I'm redesigning my website right now, and because I had COVID, I wasn't able to do a lot of work on that at the start of August. So I'm hoping to do a bit of work whilst I'm in London, and I'm also thinking about some goals that I have for the rest of the year. And one book that I want to sort of read around that subject is Life Pass: Drop Your Limits, Rise to Your Potential by Payal Kadakia, who was the founder of ClassPass. And I heard a talk with Payal that I thought was really inspiring about this book. And in this, apparently, she sort of lays out her system for goal setting, and it sounded like a really good system, and I was just very interested in what she had to say about setting goals and setting them in a way that makes them achievable as well. And I have so much that I'm planning to do over the next 6 months or so that what I wanted to spend some time at the end of summer just trying to set up some good systems in place for myself, as I have a lot to kind of do over the next few months and a lot of goals I want to achieve. So I'm really looking forward to reading this book, hopefully while I'm in London, and having a think about my own systems that I want to get in place for achieving goals. So this one will also be coming with me in my suitcase. But anyway, I really enjoyed having this little chat with you about the books that have been inspiring my upcoming trip. I will be trying to film as much as possible when I'm in London, so I'm looking forward to sharing that with you as well. But thanks so much for watching this video, and don't forget you can subscribe to my channel by clicking on my face that pops up over here. But yes, thank you so much for watching. Extra big thanks to those of you who have been pressing the super thanks button on my videos lately. You're always so very much appreciated. And thank you though to everyone who supports my channel and who watches my videos. I hope that you are having a great August, and I'll see you again very soon. Goodbye.